It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. If you're joining us on our live on our website, I appreciate you. We started a few minutes late this morning because of a cable glitch. My apologies. We, if you're watching us streaming live on our website, we are running out of our new video studio this morning, and we ran a test yesterday, and everything looked fine, but apparently we weren't getting audio at one feed, so I apologize for that. Thanks for riding with us today. You're listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to cover 4 different topics today because I know folks have, asked me if I'm going to do some kind of a Christmas show or something along those lines. Well, with all due respect, I think the best gift that Americans can give each other right now at this holiday season is not the idea that we should put off facing the reality of our situation any longer. I think we're really at a stage now where we have to recognize how far down the rabbit hole we've fallen and recognize that at our present rate of descent, we may not see another Christmas with the United States of America as we recognize it. I'm going to talk about 4 different topics today. Our first is going to be the National Defense Authorization Act of 2014. Your Congress has again betrayed the Constitution and you. I have to tell you, the number of people that voted for this is so overwhelmingly abusive of their privilege of representing you that you should be stunned at the failure of them to adhere to any principles of representative government. We're going to talk a little bit more about it. Our second topic is the CIA was brought out in a note today, or in a note yesterday, that there's a report that the CIA helped kill Colombian FARC rebel leaders. And while everybody kind of knows that goes on, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the issue surrounding that. Because that, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the problems that we have in our nation. You see, the foreign threats that we have to our nation are really there because we have this imperialistic involvement in everyone's affairs. And it has been a long-held function of our government, and it was touted as the primary focus of our foreign relations by our founders, that our true policy should be to steer clear of permanent alliances, especially with any portion of the foreign world. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about that in that, but I got to tell you, where it stands now is, in Thomas Jefferson's words, and I want you to recognize the importance of this, of the way he phrases this. When all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another and will become as venal and oppressive as the governments from which we separated. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a warning, not just for domestic issues, but specifically related to foreign issues and how our government, by its imperialistic attachment to and involvement in all of these foreign nations, is bringing a lot of the threat that we are attempting to fight against upon ourselves. All right, our third topic is 3 branches no more. You know, tyranny was defined by our founders as when all, well, in fact, I just read you the quote from Thomas Jefferson. It's applicable to this too. When all government, in little as in great, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided by one government on another. Ladies and gentlemen, Washington, D.C. is now in 100% complete control of everything. The states have become vassals, and the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary are unerringly tied together in an act, in a series of acts that have, for all intents and purposes, eliminated the rule of law here domestically in the United States of America and globally. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Our fourth segment, EPA versus the USA. I got to tell you, folks, the war on America is raging, and it's been waged now for quite some time. You're not aware of it because the media is not informing you about it. In fact, I challenge you, has the media talked at all to you about the EPA and the coal regulations that are coming down, the 6,000 brand new regulations that are about to be dropped on Americans' heads in less than a week? No, they haven't. Have they talked to you at all about the National Defense Authorization Act, other than to superficially mention it in general passing? No. See, the problem here is that the war is on. We just don't know about it. All right, let's jump into our first topic because it's one that we need to spend a few minutes on. And I got to tell you, where we are right now on this National Defense Authorization Act, it was approved last night, or I shouldn't say last night, the night on Friday. They hurried this thing through. They used the excuse of, well, we got to get out of town to get back to our families. And basically what they did was sell us out one more time. Now, if you've been listening to AVN for some time, you're familiar with the fact that that the NDAA that was passed in 2012 was, a complete obliteration of any semblance towards law. The 2013 NDAA reinforced that, and now the 2014 NDAA explains to you exactly why the NSA program of state-sponsored terrorism is being hammered down on America. What they're going to do with all that data is explained to you clearly in Section 1071 of the new 2014 National Defense Authorization Act. I got to tell you, there were only 12 Republicans who voted against this, and 3 Democrats. So that, ladies and gentlemen, tells you something. In a Senate made up of 100 representatives, only 15 have been faithful to their oath of office. The other 85 have absolutely no problem at all with selling you into oppression and slavery and into an Orwellian, dystopian police state. That's the simple truth, folks. Anything else that they tell you is marketing and rationalization for state-sponsored terrorism. That is the truth. There were only 12 Republicans who voted against it and 3 Democrats. 2 of those 12 that voted against it were on the Republican side was Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. Now, I don't endorse either guy. I think they both have problems. In fact, I don't endorse any candidate because when they do wrong, I want to hold their feet in the fire just like I want to applaud them when they do the right thing. But in this case, they did the right thing. Cruz announced today, I voted against the National Defense Authorization Act. I am deeply concerned that Congress still has not prohibited President Obama's ability to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens arrested on American soil without trial or due process. The Constitution does not allow President Obama or any president to apprehend an American citizen arrested on U.S. soil and detain these citizens indefinitely without a trial. When I ran for office, I promised the people of Texas I would oppose any National Defense Authorization Act that did not explicitly prohibit the indefinite detention of U.S. citizens. Although this legislation does contain several positive provisions that I support, it does not ensure our most basic rights as American citizens, or that our most basic rights as American citizens are protected. I got to tell you, I support Ted Cruz in a lot of the things he says and does, but in this one, he fails to raise the alarm about Section 1071. And there's absolutely no denying Section 1071 is meant to be an addition to the monstrous tyranny put onto us by the first 2012 NDAA Act that allows for indefinite detention of Americans. And to make matters worse, now we know what the NSA is doing with all of this data that they've been collecting on us. Now we know what the GCHQ is going to do with all the data that they collect on Americans, because the NSA is prohibited from doing it domestically and then gives back to the NSA. Now we know what the FBI is going to do with all of the data that they've been collecting and gathering on the American citizens, because now we understand, and for those of you that are not aware of it, you know, what the NSA is prohibited from doing domestically, the FBI does in their place, because they have domestic authority. And make no mistake about it, because I read you the articles about it, and we talked about it extensively. The NSA and the FBI have a connecting pipe, a data pipe, in which what the FBI collects, they immediately transfer right over to the NSA. All of it. So when you look at Section 1071, the brand new section, where they're going to create a conflict record research center. First of all, recognize the terminology and the phrasing they use here. A conflict records research center. They're going to establish a digital research database to research and facilitate and analyze records from captured countries, organizations, and, quote, and here's the key part, individuals, now or once hostile to the United States. Now, let's define that. Well, we can't. See, that's the problem. There is no definition, because what does now or once hostile mean? Is that fall back on the definition of a belligerent act that was proposed in the original National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 that qualified you to be indefinitely detained as a U.S. citizen? We don't know. And we'll never know. You know why? Because once you are detained as an American citizen under the 2012 NDAA, you've lost all your rights to go to court and ask a court to define what is a belligerent act. And does that belligerent act make me now or once ever hostile to the United States of America? They've created a circle that has no escape. It's like being placed in a room where once the door is closed, it is permanently sealed and invisible for you to ever find an opening again. The goal here, folks, is real clear. It's real easy. This is being set up to act as, for no other purpose than a Stasi-like, a KGB-like, a Nazi SS-like database that can be utilized to identify, target, and imprison American citizens who have bucked their system, who have fought back, who have spoken out, who have become belligerent. I'm using their words, not mine. You see, they don't define a belligerent act. But if that belligerent act is what is used to define you as now or hostile, then I think we're entitled to know what constitutes belligerency. Was it that you went to a protest against, for or against, let's say, abortion? Let's say you're an individual who is against abortion, or you're an individual who's for abortion. And let's say, for argument's sake, that you went to the Capitol and you protested there. And you were told to step back from the line because the police said you were over the boundary of where you could protest. You were no longer in a free speech zone. That takes a whole nother show. But let's assume, for argument's sake, that that's the case. Is that a constitution? Does that constitute a belligerent act? That you refused a direct order? Does your writing a blog, does your posting something on Facebook, does your posting something in Twitter constitute a belligerent act because you said that our government is acting lawlessly and treasonously against us? It can't happen here, you say. I disagree. In fact, it happened here in 1798. John Adams, one of the founders of our country, became so corrupted in his own office that he passed 2 pieces of legislation. And one, in specificity, imprisoned Americans for speaking out against their government. The Sedition Act imprisoned hundreds and hundreds of Americans because they spoke out against their own government, and they used, quote, derogatory terms. Now, with all due respect, if we cannot be derogatory, if we have no way to redress our grievances, if our free speech is so impugned that we have no opportunity to speak out when our government is abusive to us, then with all due respect, I tell you that liberty in the United States of America is dead. Freedom is gone. Our nation is now living in a state of tyranny. And I think you'll find it hard to deny the rationale behind that. If you can be accused and held guilty of a belligerent act, and we have no definition of what constitutes belligerency, look, just listen to that term for a moment. Just the phrase belligerence can be defined in so many ways, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it can mean anything. There is no limit to what can fall underneath the broad scope of a term like belligerence. Everything falls underneath that. And if that is the quantifying criteria for you to be declared now or once hostile to the United States, then of course that gives them the ability to compartmentalize, store, and research and analyze all of this data. Now they tell us what the data is, so let's go over that. Now that we know and we've identified who, and look, I'm not identifying this, they are. I'm just using their own words, and I'm using what I know is going to be the rationale they're going to try to use in court if anyone sues them. So, since we now know that they can obtain records from individuals, I mean, I get the countries and I get the organizations. Their argument there will be, okay, well, there are foreign nations that are against our best interests, let's say Iran, and that's the one that they'll use. Okay. Then they'll say, and there are organizations such as Al-Qaeda. Okay. But does that also incorporate the Tea Party? Does it incorporate the Constitution Party, the Libertarian Party? Does it constitute the ACLU? I mean, what falls up underneath the term organization? An awful lot of things, folks. And with that new designation as now or once hostile to the United States, whether it's an individual or an organization, we know that because the United States of America, in fact, there's no place on the planet that has not been declared under the 2012 NDAA to be a place of battlefield in the war on terror, the global war on terror. They've declared that the entire planet is the battlefield in the global war on terror. And since that's the case, there's no place left where you can have a home safe zone. So individuals and organizations can be found to be now or once hostile based on what? A belligerent act. And with that, they have the opportunity to preserve the following records. Consistent with the protection of national security information, they can capture personally identifiable information, intelligence sources and methods, and the records that they can store are very clear about how broad and how broad and abusive they are. In fact, they define them in their own document. I'm going to find that definition for you. Here we go. The term captured record means any document, audio file, video file, or other material captured during combat operations. Wow. And then they go on to say, not only captured during combat operations, but combat operations from countries, organizations, or individuals, now or once hostile to the United States. And since the U.S. is now a combat zone in the war on terror, I leave you to draw your own conclusion. Furthermore, they open this up not just to government, but they open it up to third parties who have political connections and ties. They can conduct and disseminate research and analysis to increase the understanding of factors related to international relations, counterterrorism, conventional and unconventional warfare. And all of this to enhance in the name of national security, right? Then to make matters worse, it says that they can collaborate with members of academic and broad national security communities, both domestic and international. So basically they're saying, listen, we can funnel information out to them and we can take information in from them, which opens the door to say, okay, so what the NSA cannot do here domestically in the United States and the FBI may be prohibited from doing because of Fourth Amendment privacy requirements under our Constitution, the GCHQ in England can, or the government in Canada, or the government down in Australia, which is, we know that that's exactly how they've been operating for years now. And so here you see the problem, folks. They're opening the door to be able to collaborate with members of broad national security communities, domestic and foreign, on research, conferences, seminars, and other information exchanges. See, information exchanges, again, leaves this wide open space. What is an information exchange? It can be anything from an entire seminar that they did in another foreign nation about how they're dealing with it, to your phone number and your email. Not to mention the fact that they've opened this up to be able to receive funding from non-government entities who would then be open and open to receive this information. In fact, these groups can transfer funds to the Department of Defense to pay for it. Who are these groups? Are these non-governmental organizations like the folks who are promoting and driving the Agenda 21 thing, like the Sierra Club and the conservation and conservancy groups out there? These radical extremists in the environmental movement? Yes, it is. You see, the problem here, ladies and gentlemen, is we have been set up over a series of 3 years with this National Defense Authorization Act to basically eviscerate any semblance of Fourth Amendment rights of Americans. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a tragedy. Because what it's going to do is set the stage for an oppression to be utilized domestically here in the United States like the world has never seen. We will be looking at oppressive tactics here domestically in the United States that will rival anything the East Germans, the Soviets, the Cubans, Pol Pot, Chairman Mao, the Chinese Communist government. We will look at tactics here in the United States and the targeting of your fellow citizens and your family members like we have seen only in the days of, and even worse than we saw in the days of Nazi Germany. How do I say that? Well, they could only wish they had the level of surveillance capabilities that we hold today. You've been listening to America's Voice. We're going to take a quick break. When we return from this break, we're going to tackle our second topic, which is the CIA has been accused of killing some Colombian FARC rebels. The problem with that is not so much that they were in there killing these rebels, because I don't know where I'll be honest, I don't know enough about the Colombian battlefield going on to know how that all shakes out. What I can tell you is that it is indicative of exactly what's happening in the United States relating to our foreign alliances. And the same applies to Colombia as applies to Al-Qaeda, as applies to Afghanistan, and applies across the board, Saudi Arabia, everywhere. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stick with us. You're listening to America's Voice Now. When we return, we'll tackle this other topic. Please find us on the web by going to americasvoicenow.org. All right. We're back. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. We're streaming live on our website. We encourage you to visit us, join us there. I know we had a bit of a technical glitch this morning because we just moved into our brand new video studio. And I want to encourage you to work with us as we move forward and improve the quality and the production value of what we do here at America's Voice, as we try to essentially deliver truth and expose propaganda, both government and media propaganda. This is the stuff that is tripping America up. This is the stuff that is making Americans not understand how far down the rabbit hole of tyranny that we've come. You know, the reality is that if you look at what you are fed as propaganda, it's no wonder America is asleep. It's no wonder America is completely and totally dependent upon government for all of its needs. The problem is that we have completely separated ourselves from what our founders intended for us. They intended for us to be self-reliant. They intended for us to be self-governing. Self-governing doesn't mean state government. It doesn't even mean county government. It doesn't mean city government. Self-governing means that we, as individuals, govern our own actions. We are responsible for those actions. That those actions that we take, whether for good or bad in our lives, are those actions that make us who and what we are. And when we do the right thing, we're rewarded. When we do the wrong thing, we have to bear the brunt of those results and the responses that come as a result of that. Now, our government is also expected to remain sovereign and self-governing. And we have seen over decades now that our involvement with foreign governments and foreign national governments has been one that is fraught with constant situations where we're involved in the business and the economies, the policies of foreign governments. We're involved with them militarily. We're involved with them economically. We're involved with them in terms of our desire to bend and mold and shape their policies. You see, instead of acting like, well, I'll sum it up this way. I have a really good friend of mine who has a quote at the bottom of her email. And this quote is especially relevant in this situation. Because, you see, what we do as a nation is we promote the gospel of liberty and freedom and free enterprise. We promote the gospel of self-governance on paper. We have a moral high ground that we stand upon. And yet, we actually don't practice what we preach. And this little line at the bottom of her email is very, very appropriate in this scenario. It says, at all times, preach the gospel, and sometimes speak. You see, we don't preach by example because we ourselves as a nation are not following our own foundational principles, our own foundational concepts. We're not doing it. We're sitting out there selling to foreign governments and foreign nations and foreign peoples the benefits and the beauty of a republic. We tout democracy. We tout free markets, free enterprise. We tout the benefits of every individual being able to make or break based on their own merit, their way through the world. But when it comes down to the actual accomplishment of that, we don't deliver. We don't even practice it ourselves. Our own government has become so repressive on Americans by nature and by the virtue of the way in which they are fostering and driving an intended dependence that the message falls on them like a preacher who everyone in his congregation knows is engaged in an extramarital affair. How does he have any credibility? He doesn't. You can't be a leader and say, this is what I perceive and believe, and then have the press be constantly out there showing how you've lied and misrepresented the truth and betrayed your constituencies. You can't be the pastor of a church who says, I believe in the following tenets, and then violate them clearly and openly and be caught at it and still have a level of credibility to be able to stand up in front of a congregation and say, this is how you should live your life. Because you're no longer a shepherd with moral authority. If we want to lessen the danger of foreign threats to our nation, we need to abandon the imperialistic involvement that we have in all of their affairs. George Washington gave us the outline for that philosophy, and he didn't say this once, ladies and gentlemen. He said this multiple times. In fact, where it was most broadly recognized as a quote from him was in his farewell address, in which he warned us, it is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. Now, there are those who will argue that we can't isolate ourselves in a global economy. You're an isolationist. I'm not an isolationist. I just believe that there's a period and that there's a limit to how far you go. And our national sovereignty should be one of the things that we look upon and say, this is a boundary where we will not cross. This is the red line, so to speak. That alliances with foreign governments should be for the purposes of trade acceptable. But for the purposes of going in and fighting their battles on their behalf, for the purposes of going in and taking sides, especially when that side is clearly not in line with that which we espouse as a nation. Freedom. How many oppressive regimes are we on the side of? I mean, come on, folks. This doesn't take rocket science. Anybody who argues to the contrary is trying to split hairs with you. If we're on the side of a domineering government, then we're on the side of the wrong side. The truth is, that's not an isolationist concept. That's just a concept of moral high ground. You don't have to be an isolationist to have the moral high ground and to rationally understand and accept it for what it is. And that applies to politics as well as every other aspect of our lives. You see, this stuff isn't related only to politics. It flows down. It's a truth, whether it's a truth in your personal life, whether it's a truth in your business life, whether it's a truth in our political lives, whether it's a truth related to our nation. Truth is truth, regardless of how and whom it's applied to. The folks who try to tell you that we cannot isolate ourselves, that's a bunch of drivel that they feed you. Because what they're trying to do is rationalize their intent to drag us, kicking and screaming and unwillingly, into a global new world order. A new world order where we as a nation have no sovereignty, where you as an individual have no sovereignty, and your rights are granted to you as a privilege, not as creator given. Where this is a land where we violate our own constitutional foundations. And the hypocrisy is obvious, because here we are vocally claiming the moral high ground politically, but our actions clearly belie our words. There's no truth to them, and everyone can see. It's the absurdity of the old adage of the king who wore no clothes. And he marches down the street, and everyone, because they fear him, says, "Oh, Majesty, your clothes are so wonderful." And they all pretend he's wearing clothes just because they fear his wrath. This is no different. Our government is no different than any other government. It has become corrupted beyond all recognition to what our founders' intentions were for us as a nation, for us as individuals, for our governments, both state and federal. We are no longer within any semblance of any boundaries that existed within the scope of their visage of what this nation should look like. And I can prove that to you. In fact, I'm going to prove it to you. Thomas Jefferson, he and Madison were probably they would be construed to be the founders, if you will, of our present Constitution. And they were both prolific writers. And Jefferson wrote repeatedly about the dangers of government becoming this all-consequential power. I'm going to read you this quote, and I want you to recognize it for what it is. And I want you to pay special attention to the part where he applies the global sense to this phrase. Now, it applies domestically as well. But it also, and you'll hear why, it applies in a global sense. Note his use of the word foreign. Here's what he says. When all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another, and will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. Just think about that for a moment. When all government, domestic and foreign, notice the key phrase foreign here. He's clearly speaking, when he says domestic and foreign, about foreign nations. And when they cede their power in little as in great things, and they are drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it renders powerless the checks that are provided of one government on another. And that means he's talking about one government on another in terms of both state governments against the federal government. He's talking about the judiciary versus the executive versus the legislative. He's talking about our relationship with foreign nations. He's covering it all right here. And his warning is that when that occurs, we will become as venal and as oppressive as the government from which we separated. Ladies and gentlemen, I posit to you, we've already reached that point. We have become venal. We are oppressive, domestically and internationally. Here we are abusing foreign governments, claiming that it's in their best interest to have a democracy which we don't practice ourselves. How do I know that? How can I say such a thing? We don't practice a democracy or a republic here. And by the way, for the record, I'm tired of hearing politicians say that this is a democracy. It's not a democracy. This is a republic. And if you don't know the difference between a republic and a democracy, a representative republic that operates democratically, you really need to go and educate yourself. A democracy, in full scale is just sheer majority rules. So in theory, under a democracy, we could say rape, robbery, and murder are okay, as long as the majority says so. Wow. Think about that for a moment. It's okay if the majority says that those people who have any wealth, if the general consensus is, and the majority says, 51% of us say, it's okay to strip the wealth from those people and redistribute it, that's okay and it's acceptable. I beg to differ. In a representative republic that has a democratic elective system, the government operates as a foundational bulwark, a backstop to say, yes, democracy rules in terms of the majority vote. However, only to the extent where it doesn't infringe on the individual rights that are outlined in the Bill of Rights. So nothing that the majority can say can take away your ability to free speech, to worship in the way in which you choose, to honor and respect and follow a religion that you believe in, that you cannot be stripped of your Second Amendment rights, that you have your Fourth Amendment rights to privacy, and that you cannot be abused in your personal effects and in your home and in your things. That you have a right not to be forced to incriminate yourself at the point of a gun by the threat of coercive violence, which is the only power that government actually has, ladies and gentlemen. You see, the truth is, here we are taking our imperialistic influence overseas, where there is no constitution that foundationally gives them a base of operation, and we're saying, now, we believe in this over here, but when we come to your town, when we come to your country, we can abuse you because you don't have those constitutional rights, and we can take sides in whichever country or whichever government we think is going to best administer our need and our growth in power and influence. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a tragic mistake. You see, Washington wasn't telling us to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world from a trade perspective. He was saying, do not make treaties with people who, for all intents and purposes, are your enemy. Do not involve yourself in their internal affairs. Because to follow that line of thinking, once we become so involved, so intrinsically connected to their government, we have done what? We have dragged the influence home to us. And when all governments, domestic and foreign, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it renders powerless the checks provided. You see, listen, whether you believe that we're in this step into this new world order and a global, elitist one world government or not, I can tell you that every government is obviously vying for a seat at the table and a leadership role in that. Just because we're migrating away from independent national sovereignty into this unnamed, untamed, unexplored territory of one world government, don't make the mistake of thinking that somebody's already been chosen to be the leader of that. We're vying for it. China is vying for it. Russia is vying for it. The European Union is vying for that leadership role. And we're doing the best we can to corrupt all of those governments out there so that we can get them underneath our influential power, so that they will side and align with us. You see, your government is not only oppressing you domestically, they're oppressing the planet. They're coercing and corrupting the planet, trying to gather underneath them the allies that they will need in order to become the de facto global power. Make no mistake about it. China is actively at work doing the same exact thing. Russia is actively at work doing the same exact thing. Go look at the problems that they're having over in Yugoslavia right now and in the Ukraine. The Ukraine, their leader, their president, is allying himself with Russia. And the Ukrainian people say, we don't want to be aligned with Russia. The last time that happened, 50 million of us were starved to death. Thank you very much. We don't want to go back there. We've been there. We saw that movie. We know how it ends. And it wasn't in our favor. You see, the major power players are gathering the minor players underneath their skirts. Because they are trying to draw the power and the influence to them. It's a mistake for us to play that game with them. Why? Because it puts us, one, on a global collision course with China and Russia. It puts us into a power confrontational zone that we cannot really afford at this point, economically, politically, or constitutionally. I mean, our own government has reached beyond the boundaries of any constitutional framework that it exists with. So if you trust that government to go out there and represent our interests as a nation by subjugating and abusing and coercing and co-opting and corrupting everyone underneath them that they can get their hands on, to ally to them by force, you're making a serious mistake. The problem is that we have lost our connection to let's do right at home and then do right abroad. And the best right that we can do abroad is not to be involved in their political affairs. By being involved in their political affairs, we are essentially corrupting them. All right, I'd like you to, we've only got a minute or two left here. I'd like to make sure that you folks are cognizant and working with our sponsors. You know, we have a group down in West Plains, the Battery Station, and these guys are real big promoters of this program. And they're also real dedicated patriots. This year, they are working with D Company 18 Cav called the Reapers. They're stationed in Afghanistan, and they are in need of, one, some funding, and two, some gifts that they can send over there. They send over a ton of assorted lights and batteries and foodstuffs to a military group that's stationed abroad, and these guys are deployed out in the field. These are not, a bunch of can counters sitting in a warehouse somewhere back in behind the front lines. These guys are out there literally, out in these forward operating bases where they don't have access to a shower for 6 weeks at a crack. And so regardless of whether you believe that we should be there politically or what have you, makes no difference. These are our soldiers. These are our men. And these men went over there with the highest honor and the highest belief that they were doing the right thing. And so I'm encouraging you to participate with them and assist Battery Station in this effort. It's an annual one. This is their 8th year. Each year they pick a different group. They can be found at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains. Their phone number is 417-257-7799. Their email address is troops@batterystation.com. Their website is just plain batterystation.com. Now, this is these guys are one of the biggest distributors of batteries and flashlights and gear like that in the nation. But in this stuff that they ship over to the troops, they donate thousands and thousands of dollars worth of their inventory. They pay for all this shipping out of their pocket, and it costs them thousands of dollars every year to do this. What they're looking for from you, from a donation perspective, is things like unscented baby wipes and unscented bar soaps and deodorant, shampoo, toothbrushes, foot powder, magazines, newspapers, books, cards, and games, toilet paper, stuff. I mean, this is the stuff that we take for granted, right, folks? I mean, we take toilet paper, for example, for granted. I mean, here's a guy who's living out in the bush, and he hasn't had a shower in a month and a half. Shoe inserts, hand lotion, cotton swabs, razor blades, just, disposable razors, socks and underwear, things like that. Anything you'd send to them, by the way, must be unscented. These guys are out there hunting, and they don't want to be smelling like, a flower shop. There are also food items that they send over, like foil packets of tuna and chicken and beef and things like that, rice and soup mixes, candy, cookies, any kind of beef jerky, anything that doesn't have a quick shelf life, that's not expirable. So, okay, please make sure that you are working with them. You can contact the Battery Station to ask them what they need, and/or if you're not local and you'd like to make a monetary donation, you can call over there and talk to them about it. It's the Battery Station. They're located at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains, Missouri, 65775. Their phone number is 417-257-7799. That's 417-257-7799. Their website is batterystation.com, and the email for them is troops@batterystation.com for this project. For any other type of business, it's just plain info@batterystation.com. Make sure that you are working with the Battery Station. I'm going to talk to you when we come back from this break about the co-op program we have with them, because that's a direct benefit to you, and it's only open to America's Voice Now listeners. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about 3 branches, no more. When I say that, I mean that was supposed to be the division line for our nation, right? As we had three branches to apply checks and balances, one against the other. How that has failed, and how that is an example itself of tyranny. We'll be right back.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. We're in our third segment here on the 23rd of December. If you're streaming with us live on our website, thanks very much for riding with us today. I appreciate you. You'll notice that we're streaming out of our new video studio, and I'm pleased to be here and pleased to be finally broadcasting from this facility. We've made some major changes. We had a bit of a glitch this morning. We did this over the weekend, and we had a little bit of an audio issue this morning, but it's been solved, and we are streaming, and we'll be streaming here going forward. We're working on some improvements, and we're trying to obtain some additional equipment that will give us some capabilities and other issues that will help us to improve the quality of what we do and the programming that we do for you. We'll also be able to create here video specials that are not part of, if you will, the radio program, but will be more like television programs in terms of a commentary hour and some news programs. We're working diligently to bring that to you. We can always use some funding help because, well, frankly, you know, this is a shoestring project. It works basically on donations. I don't get paid. We don't sell anything. We're not selling books, and we're not selling lotions and snake oil and nonsense. You'll never hear us out there promoting and selling products to try to pay for this. I don't get paid to do this. This is purely a voluntary effort. So anything that you can do to assist us is greatly appreciated. If you'd like to donate to our program and our project, we would gratefully appreciate your assistance. There's a couple of ways you can do that. You can go to our website. There's some links on there where you can either become a monthly sponsor, where it will automatically utilize a payment of 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 or whatever dollars a month, or you can make a one-time payment. You can utilize that through PayPal, and even if you don't have a PayPal account, it will allow you to utilize a credit card or a debit card through that system. In addition to that, you can mail us payments if that works better for you, and you can mail them to America's Voice Now. That's P.O. Box 1195. That's P.O. Box 1195, and that's in West Plains, Missouri, 65775. So again, that's America's Voice Now, P.O. Box 1195, West Plains, Missouri, 65775. Now, one of the things that we do that is kind of unique, other than the fact that, we're out here dispelling the mainstream ministry propaganda that you're fed all day long, and we're trying to help you by bringing the issues to your attention and discussing them in depth so that you really understand them, is we work with a group of sponsors who, certainly support our efforts here. They advertise with us on our radio station programming and things like that. Battery Station was one of them. I just talked to you at the end of the last segment about them and the work that they do with the annual Christmas drive that they do for our soldiers in Afghanistan. But I got to tell you, they've also worked with us to bring a benefit to America's Voice Now users that I think you'll find valuable. We have a cooperative program with them, a food co-op, if you will, in which you can actually obtain wholesale bulk food at pricing that you can't touch anywhere else. Now, they don't make a profit on it. They just do it as a service to our listenership. Kevin, the owner of Battery Station, is a friend of mine. And one day we were sitting down saying, what can we do locally to help folks? Because it's not just a question of, educating. You need the ability to be able to help prepare your family for emergencies, and whether those are natural or man-made or otherwise, preparing and keeping and being prepared are good things to do, irrespective of why you think you need to be prepared. It's just an insurance policy. And so we began this cooperative program where you can buy bulk food in 50-pound 50-pound lots, like bag of 50 pounds of grain or wheat or rice, or 25-pound bag of sugar or salt, or whatever the case may be. And you're getting it at wholesale pricing, which, by the admission of a number of our listeners who have taken advantage of this program, is anywhere between 30 and 50% less than you would end up paying for the similar quantity at retail pricing. 50%. Folks, if you don't take advantage of that, then I'm not quite sure why you're listening. This is one of the benefits that comes to AVN listeners. There's no fees. There's no membership to join. There's no magic. We just make it easy for you. You can go over to Battery Station. They're located on Washington Avenue at 303 Washington Avenue. Go in there and say, Mike from America's Voice sent me over here, and he told me to ask for the co-op book. That's all you got to say. They know what to do. They'll hand you a catalog. You can take a look through this, the sheet of products that are available. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of products that are available. It's not just, those types of things I talked about before. It's also the Mylar bags if you want to take this and freeze dry it and store it and things like that. So avail yourself of this opportunity. That's what we created it for, as a benefit to our listenership, so that they could practice what they preach. So we could practice what we preach. We think that's important, and you should too. Now, in addition to that, one of our other sponsors, I'd really like you to make sure that you're working with them, and that is Jason over at the haircutting place right on the square. And Jason is a friend of mine. He's the guy who cuts my hair, and he does a great job. He's $10, folks, and it's called Wits End Classic Barbershop. It's right there on the square. And Jason's a young fella, but I'll tell you what, he's a true American patriot, and he's just an excellent young man. I think you'll be very impressed, one, by the quality of the way he does his job, but in addition to that, who he is and what his personality is. Recently, they opened up a facility behind the barbershop, which is their Patriot cigar facility. And basically, it's a tobacconist shop, and they've got everything in there from humidors to pipes and cigars and any kind of tobacco product you can imagine. It's also a place where you can actually go in there, and a couple of guys can go in there, or guys and girls. I've seen girls in there smoking pipes and cigars. And there's like a little area where you can sit down and have a nice conversation. And if you want to bring a bottle of your own alcohol with you, you can do that. You can rent a humidor there where you can store your things there. You can buy cigars and put them in this humidor and store them there. They do have humidors for sale and all kinds of other gadgets and things like lighters and, basically anything that's connected to pipes and cigars and tobacco. It's a great opportunity for you to take advantage of that. And I tell you, I'm very impressed with what they've been able to do there. It's a beautiful facility, and I think you'll recognize how nice it is when you get inside there. So make sure that you participate with them. And when you do, make sure that you say to them, I came here because I was listening to America's Voice and Mike told me to come in here. I just want you to know that your advertising works. Okay? That's the best measure that they have of, hey, is our advertising dollar working? And the more their advertising works, the more likely they are to continue to advertise and help support this program from which you benefit. It's a perfect circle, folks, and it works every time. Okay. I want to tackle this topic here on this issue of how we have, for all intents and purposes, lost our differentiation between the three branches of government that was the design of our founders. I say that because where we are right now is, and I used the same quote in the last segment, but it's very applicable here today too. When all government, domestic and foreign, and little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it renders powerless the checks and balances provided of one government on another, and will become as venal and impressive as the government from which we separated. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a government that is operating exclusively outside the boundaries of the Constitution, legislatively, judicially, and in the executive. We have an executive that's so out of control that at this point, the courts are routinely finding that this government and this president in specificity have abused their executive authority and privilege. Federal judge has ordered the Obama administration to disclose documents he's been trying to keep hidden. And, you know, this is not the first time. I mean, we saw the same thing with Fast and Furious. We've seen the same thing with the NSA. And it's constantly this diatribe about national security and executive privilege. Well, I got to tell you, folks, you know what? A government that operates in secret like that is really not one that is ever going to benefit us. You know, let me sum it up with a quote from James Madison, because you know, Madison and Jefferson are really considered to be the two fathers of the Constitution in terms of sitting down and writing it and things like that. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Listen to the phrasing and the words he's using, because if you don't see the correlation right here that is exposed to our current situation, you're not looking at this through clear and objective eyes. The accumulation of all power, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Now, we do see in occasional instances where the courts will come out and defy this president. But I've got to tell you, folks, they're in the minority. And even when they do so in a way that has no real power or teeth for us to fight back with. This federal judge has ordered the Obama administration to disclose documents it's been trying to keep hidden related to government-wide foreign aid, signed back in 2010. But he's kept it hidden from the public. Why? What is unique about this given foreign aid that we can't know about? Why is it taxpayers are expected to cover this cost of this foreign aid, and yet we're not entitled to know about who it went to? What was its purpose? The Department of Justice, who's supposed to be in charge of the law enforcement aspects of the nation, the highest law enforcement agency in the land, is acting in total and abusive oppression against Americans by enforcing this secrecy on everyone and everything. I mean, we're constantly seeing examples where the Department of Justice and the Fast and Furious examples withheld documentation, told Congress, you know, basically, you can go jump in the lake. We're not giving this to you. Congress's job constitutionally is to have oversight of governmental agencies and other governmental departments. In other words, it's Congress's job to oversee abuse in the judiciary and the executive. It is the judiciary's job to make sure that when someone brings a legitimate issue to court and says the federal government is operating abusively with its powers, that it puts a check and a balance on that. And the same thing when Congress passes an unconstitutional law. And yet we see all three groups. We see an executive that is completely out of control. We see a Congress that no longer represents American people, passing things like, you know, Obamacare is a perfect example. And then we see a court system, a judiciary that backs them up versus tossing their their rulings and their unconstitutional actions out. And so, again, I refer you back to the original statement that Madison said. The accumulation of all power in the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, when it's in the same hands, whether it's one hand, a few hands, or many hands, and whether those hands have been granted that by hereditary, self-appointed action, or elective action, it justly pronounces the very definition of tyranny. Now, in this case, there could be arguments made that it is hereditary because, when you're in that elitist class, you make sure that your kids get the best treatment and so forth and so on. But the truth is, the vast majority of this is self-appointed and elective. It's elective in the sense that we put these people in there, and then they turn around and act against our best interests, like they just did with the National Defense Authorization Act and the budget bill that they just signed, and the budget war and the debt ceiling fights that they just had a couple of months ago. I mean, every action lately by Congress is a complete and utter capitulation to tyranny. So they're self-appointed and or elected. Congress gives itself authority and power that it does not possess constitutionally. The creation of literally thousands of executive agencies is perfect example proof of that. Not a single federal agency in the United States, with the exception of two, has a constitutional authority to exist. The first is the Department of Commerce. And the second, the only two that can, the second one out of that is the Border Patrol. Why? Because the federal government is given the job and given a responsibility to maintain and control and protect the nation's borders. Now, no one, would argue that they've done a good job at that. Not even the liberal progressives can argue that. They have not. They may argue we don't want any borders, but they can't argue the fact that the Border Patrol and try to get us to believe that the Border Patrol has done a good job locking this down. The truth is, you've got a federal government and a president who is out there espousing, and Nancy Pelosi came out the other day and said the president should pass executive actions bypassing Congress in order to further immigration allowances in the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an open statement of treason. She knows that the Constitution says the president doesn't have that kind of authority. He cannot make law. Only Congress can make a law. That the Constitution does say. But Nancy Pelosi can't. President Obama can't. The courts cannot. And in fact, if you want to take this one step further down that road, every agency that is out there operating, including the EPA, which we're going to be talking about in our last and final segment next, is operating outside the constitutional boundaries afforded by the document itself. None of these agencies have constitutional authority to act. They're passing rules and regulations that call themselves law, parade about as law, carry all the benefits and all of the negatives and all of the dangers of law for you, and yet Congress hasn't passed them. They passed them merely by declaring them to be so. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is pronounced the very definition of tyranny. You have an executive that is operating in complete and utter lawlessness. In fact, for the first time, we're actually seeing mainstream media referring to this president in that fashion. Now, I've got to tell you something. That has never happened before in the history of the United States of America. Never has the media, even during the days of Nixon, which is about as far back as most of us can remember, where there was a scenario similar to this, even then, they may have referenced the lawless actions by him, but not a clear and consistent pattern, 5 years of that same type of lawlessness, with overreaching the executive. Nixon was guilty of many dirty tricks to expand his own authority and power and to make sure he retained his seat. But this stuff that's going on now is completely above the pale in reference to. I'm going to give you an example. There's a story out this morning, and it's from the New York Times. The White House tries to prevent a judge from ruling on surveillance efforts. You've got to be kidding me. That is blatant interference in the judicial process from within the executive department of the nation. You know that lawlessness has reached cataclysmic proportion when you hear that the administration on the executive side is attempting to influence the judicial side to find in its favor, allowing them to continue what the court would ordinarily say is tyrannical abusive behavior. There's no constitutional claim to a state secret privilege. Not in a republic, ladies and gentlemen. The three branches are by design to create it as checks and balances against tyranny. This is an unprecedented, and that's the president's word, not mine. He uses it about every eighth sentence he says. So this is an unprecedented level of obstruction by one branch over another, and it threatens the last tenuous threads of the rule of law that are left in this nation. It truly does. The courts have repeatedly found that this president and this administration have abused their authority. And I got to tell you, folks, that should be the only precedent by which the court actually gives weight to. Under American jurisprudence, the rules of justice, when a question of harm is applied, the court must find in favor of the injured party to prevent that damage from occurring. The courts are required to do that, especially against government, because government, by its very nature, has such extraordinary weight and power. And yet, the entire nation is subjected to this Orwellian abuse by a government run amok. If you don't see the handwriting on the wall, let me read it for you. The accumulation of all power, legislative, executive, and judiciary, when in the same hands, whether one, a few, or many, and whether obtained through hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen, that was written by Madison 200 and some odd years ago. He warned us what it would look like so that we wouldn't be caught unaware and say, well, we didn't see it. The truth is, it's there for us to see. If we choose not to see it, that's a willing abdication on our part. But there's no reason why we shouldn't recognize it when it arrives. And I got to tell you, folks, it's already here. The battle has begun. The war is on. Make no mistake about it. We are in a war. I know most Americans don't want to think that, but it doesn't make it not so. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle our fourth segment this morning, the EPA versus the USA. In fact, I'm going to express to you and show you examples of how the war on America is already raging and waged. We are under attack right now from our own government. When you hear and understand the depth of depravity of this agency, it's impossible to ignore. We'll be right back. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Stick with us. We'll be back in just a few seconds. All right. We're back. Thanks for riding with us this morning. Appreciate the opportunity to spend the morning with you. You know, when we look at the argument that, and you've probably heard me posit this argument before, but when we look at that level of abuse that we're currently operating under, where our government is oppressing us, if you will, there's no denying that it's reached a proportion which we've never experienced before in this country. I mean, clearly, we are in over our head in terms of what we can expect. I mean, we just don't get, because we've never really experienced it before. Foreign nations, by the way, folks, and if you don't believe that we're in trouble here, go ask some folks here who have emigrated here from other nations where they were oppressed in a way which we haven't even really yet begun to feel. But I got to tell you, the stage is being set right now for an oppression level that is unprecedented and terrifying. The EPA is one of the agencies, the executive agencies, that are operating extra-constitutionally and have no basis for existence under our Constitution. And they are declaring war on the people in the United States of America. It's economic war, but it is war nonetheless. The president is instituted a climate action plan. He unveiled it in June. And the EPA is putting it into practice. Now, first of all, the president has no authority to issue executive orders to bypass Congress. Much less does he have the right to utilize the EPA as his weapon of mass destruction, or the IRS or any other agency out there. The EPA is mandating these exorbitant and punitive limits on power plant creation or emissions because they utilize coal. And here's the problem. Electricity cannot be generated and stored. You can only produce and use that which you've created. There is no way to create electricity and store it somewhere. I mean, other than, not on a national scale. You can in your car. It's called a battery. But, there's no giant battery to store energy we've created. So that which we create, we use immediately. And I got to tell you, this is a showdown between the nation and an agency completely out of control. It's economics versus political correctness and radical environmentalism. And a president way outside the boundaries of his constitutional authority. The nation, this country, right here, right now, today, is in the throes of an epic battle. You may not recognize it's going on, but mark my words, it's happening. If the EPA wins this, the entire United States economy and our way of life is sentenced to death. Everything that we have in modern civilization runs on electricity. And if you hearken back to the president's pre-election promises back from prior to 2008, he told us. He tipped his hat then. Nobody believed him. They all thought, that's not what he really means. When are you going to start recognizing that what he was saying before is exactly what he meant? We are in the fundamental transformation of the United States of America, being remolded in his vision for us. Frankly, it's not a vision I want. And I resent one man being able to implement a vision on 315 million other people. Anywhere else, ladies and gentlemen, that's called a dictatorship. If the EPA wins, our entire economy is subject to a shift that's so radical in its strength and in its purpose that we'll never recover because we don't have the jobs and the manufacturing and the resources to withstand the change. the entire economy, and at this point it's obvious that it's willful, is being destroyed. There are 2 articles out there by the New American, which I'm referencing some of this information from. They have one article out there that I thought was very interesting because it's titled, "What Happens Without Coal?" And they open it up with the phrase that wind and solar energy sources can wreak havoc on utility grids. And the reason why is because there's no way to store it. You either have to use it immediately, and we cannot have a system, a national grid system that operates only when the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. That's not how our nation works. I mean, that might work for an agrarian society, but it doesn't work for a highly industrialized society. What are we supposed to do? Close all the plants because darkness falls and the solar energy is not drawing off enough, manufacturing enough power? Well, it's been a windless week, so we got to shut the factories down? What few we have left? People aren't allowed to turn on their air conditioners, even though it's sweltering hot? I mean, how insane is that? If we wanted to move back to those days, why don't we go back to the days of wind-moved ships? Let's just get rid of all the diesel engines and just put sails on everything. Why don't we go back to horse-drawn carriages and wagons? Because that would be so disruptive of our society that we don't even give it a moment's consideration. And we shouldn't give this a moment's consideration. Why? Well, it's really simple, actually. Until alternative energy methodology gets to a point where it can produce the equivalent of what coal produces, there is no substitute. And so, therefore, we shouldn't give any of this any credibility or credence. We can't afford to. Certainly not in the depths of the economic scenario we find ourselves in today. It's inconceivable that we should sit and consider the idea that, I mean, look, this is the equivalent of quitting your job before you've lined another one up in a bad economy. Who does that? And why? Isn't that just another form of self-treason? You're betraying yourself, and you know you're betraying yourself, and you care not and act against your own best interest. That's insane. The truth is, the environmentalists are out there screaming and getting their way for an argument which hasn't even been empirically proven exists, number one. I know they say, oh my goodness, climate change. Well, listen, they've been disproven when we were talking about global freezing, global warming. Now they just call it climate change because they don't want to be caught in another misnomer. The truth is, there is climate change. There always has been and there always will be. But it is not an excuse for us to completely destroy and decimate our own economy in an effort to corral and control something which is cyclical and global on a scale we have no control over. I'm not suggesting that we can't, in some way, shape, or form, minimize some of the damage that we may do environmentally. And I'm all for clean water, and I'm all for clean air, and I'm all for clean, a clean environment. We have to live in it, right? We got to eat it and breathe it and drink it and live on it. But to go out in there and say, we're going to fundamentally transfer and change the scope of everything that we do and know, and the shape our nation is currently grown into, and to start, instead of trimming that, just wholesale hacking off of major trunks of the tree is insane. How do you expect the tree to live? And all at the behest of radical environmentalists who have, for all intents and purposes, hijacked the EPA and so many other government agencies and this presidency. I mean, the president said to us, under my plan, electricity costs will necessarily skyrocket. Well, that's exactly what we're getting. But that has an economic impact that ripples throughout the pond of the economics of the entire nation. You see, we are in a war in our nation. We're in a war that is being waged against us by our own government. The EPA is no friend of the average American or the economy or industry or business or anything else. And I want you to understand the depths of how far down this path we've fallen, because without understanding it, you cannot fight it. In fact, you will decry and declare that there really is no war on. You'll say, well, I don't see it. I don't see the evidence of that. The evidence is all around you. And if you're not looking, it's because you're unwilling to look. The truth is that right now, all of the other alternative energy sources that we generate produce so little of our percentage of our overall power needs that it's almost not worthy of mention. Coal produces greater than 60% of our entire power requirement. You know what renewables produce? About 15%. So do the math. Where are we going to get the shortfall? Where are we going to make up the difference? And how are we going to pay for it? Most Americans are having trouble putting food on their table. How are they going to pay double and triple and quadruple electric bills? Don't tell me you haven't noticed your electric bill go up. Since this president has been in power, I can tell you empirically that my personal electric bill has climbed by almost 60 or 70%. It's stunning. Imagine when you're trying to run a manufacturing business. Imagine when you're trying to build cars or run a steel producing plant or a mining operation or just a warehouse. We don't have the wherewithal and the capability to reproduce what coal currently produces. And with that simple fact lies an unspoken or unacknowledged truth. We're not prepared to let the EPA wage war on America under coal, under the possession and ownership of all water and water rights. The new regulations that are about to come out from the EPA number somewhere approximating 6,000. And they're writing as fast and as furiously as they can. They can't produce enough. They're working desperately to manufacture an agenda that doesn't even exist so that they can reinforce their own need to exist. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the definition of self-treason for the EPA. They are producing nothing and taking from us. They're not producing cleaner water and cleaner air at this stage in the game. They're producing regulations which are so overbearing, the cost right now to the American economy is estimated to be between $300 and $400 billion just to sit and make sure that we're in alignment with the tens of thousands of pages of nonsensical regulations that flow around us like a tornado. The truth is, we can't afford this. Electricity can't be stored. Until they've figured out a way to do that, we need what we need when we produce it. And if we can't produce it in a cost-effective manner, it damages our nation, it damages our economy, and therefore it damages our national security, and it damages each of us. Remember, we are the nation, not the other way around. You know, Adams was, Patrick Henry was quoted as saying, "Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it the gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or your peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Now, he was talking about a physical war with the British. I know we're in a soft tyranny, but the war is the war, nonetheless. Remember that the war with the British started out as an economic tyrannical oppression that threatened to destroy the infant nation. And war, almost all wars, are originally somehow or other involved in an economic scenario. This one's no different, ladies and gentlemen. The Civil War was based upon states' economic rights to be free from government tariffs and partisanship, where it was the federal government penalizing this state in favor of a state that they preferred, picking winners and losers among states. Now you've got the EPA picking winners and losers among companies and individuals and property owners and energy-producing plants. The truth is, folks, this is no different than any other war. And everything that this government does, which is done, in secret, and, the EPA is probably one of the worst agencies we've got for operating in that concept of secrecy. They produce these rules and regulations and dump them on us in such massive quantities, we can't even track and figure out what we're supposed to follow and not follow. We don't know. There's too many of them to keep track of. We can't follow the laws when there are so many that we can't possibly keep up with them all. I mean, where is it written that Americans should have to hire an attorney just to be able to survive? To be able to operate and run a business? The truth is, we can't continue like this. We can't continue like this, ladies and gentlemen. Madison said to us in the Federalist Papers, and remember, the Federalist Papers were explaining to us the concept of this nascent nation, right? This brand new constitution they had written, and what does it all mean to people? And they were expressing that in writing the Federalist Papers and saying to the folks that were supposed to vote on it, hey, this is what it means. This is what our intentions were. And here's what he said in Federalist Paper number 62. It will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice, if those laws are so voluminous that they cannot be read, or they are so incoherent that they cannot be understood, if they be repealed or revised before they're even promulgated, or if they undergo such incessant change that no man who knows what the law is today can guess what it will be tomorrow. Law is defined to be a rule of action. But how can that be a rule which is little known or less fixed? Well, he was defining the EPA right here. He didn't know it. He was defining these administrative agencies, the literally thousands upon thousands of them that exist, from the Department of Education to the FCC to the FAA to the, every one of them. It will be of little avail to the people if the laws that are made by men of their own choice, by our elections, are so voluminous, so many, that we can't even figure out how to read them all. Or if they're so incoherent that we can't understand them. And ladies and gentlemen, look, there are attorneys that cannot track this. There are IRS special accountants that all they deal with is tax law, and they can't figure out what the convoluted mix of the messages is. This is like a pot of spaghetti. And everyone is expected to inherently know how to pull every piece out and straighten it out again. We're too busy just trying to make a living to figure that out. And if you got to hire an attorney and an accountant just to get through life, Madison is telling us very clearly here, that was not our founders' intentions. If the laws are repealed or revised before they can even be put into place and promulgated, well, guess what? Doesn't that define Obamacare? Here's a president who has made 18 modifications to the law outside of Congress, just unilateral declarations. You can do this, you can do that. We're gonna let you do. Who are you to say you're gonna let us do anything? Well, we're gonna let you buy insurance now and avoid the IRS penalty. Give me a constitutional basis for that kind of a statement, folks. That statement alone qualifies that man for an impeachment process. If these laws are repealed and revised so often before they're promulgated, or they undergo such incessant change that no man who knows the law today can guess what it's going to be tomorrow, bingo. Property owners, developers, manufacturers, factories, electricity generators, nobody knows what the law can be tomorrow. And we don't even know what it is today. And we have even less idea of what it's going to be like tomorrow. It's a government out of control, folks. And the sad part is that it's going to be up to us to correct this. That means you. Join us at americasvoicenow.org and participate with us in trying to figure out how to do that. All right, make sure that you visit two of our sponsors, Wits End Classic Barbershop in West Plains, Missouri, right on the square in West Plains. They're a great place to get a haircut. It's 10 lousy bucks. I get my haircut there all the time. He does an excellent job. Good young man. And also they have the Patriots tobacco shop right behind there. Any kind of tobacco product you could want. They're right on the square in West Plains. I encourage you to participate with them. And then also make sure that when you're in there, you mentioned that you heard about it on America's Voice Now and that Mike sent you down there. Please also make sure that you visit and patronize the Battery Station in West Plains at 303 Washington Avenue, West Plains. That's on the main drag heading up into the square. And that's their phone number is 417-257-7799. That's 257-7799. Or you can find them on the web at batterystation.com. Ask them about the Radio Listeners Co-op program for America's Voice Now listeners, and you can save a ton of money on your food supplies. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. Join our Facebook page at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And then also find us in every program that we do on YouTube, where we stream and post up our videos at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.